This is my journey. Inspired one story at a time, a library of leaders was created. It began as a journey to learn. As time went on, it began to grow. All it needed was a platform, and this podcast was created to listen, to inspire, to share. I am a storyteller, and this is my journey. Welcome to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. I'm your host, Steve Anderson, and today our guest is Duncan Brand, who is a leadership and organizational effectiveness advisor, author of Mind the Gap, and founder of Intrinsic Leader. He has worked with nearly 100 organizations across healthcare, technology, finance, and the public sector, helping leaders strengthen cultures, succession planning, and team effectiveness. Drawing from firsthand experience during the financial crisis at the Federal Reserve and throughout COVID-era healthcare challenges, Duncan focuses on helping organizations move beyond outdated leadership models and build people-first systems that support adaptability, engagement, and long-term effectiveness in the modern workplace. So Duncan, welcome to the program. It's great to have you on today.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate it and glad to be here.
So tell us a little bit, let's just do a little bit of the backstory, give us a little context here. So why don't you kind of tell us where you grew up, kind of maybe some of your earlier influences and how you got to Seattle and where you are today.
Yeah, thank you for that. And as you can probably tell, I'm not from these shores. I grew up in the UK, not far from London. Spent my formative years there and actually moved to Germany for 5 years or so before coming to the States, and landed in California and kind of worked my way up the West Coast here to Seattle through various job opportunities, choices that I made, and really glad that I did. And along the way, worked for some wonderful companies such as Hewlett-Packard, Cisco, Federal Reserve, as you mentioned there, Steve. So yeah, it's been my life's work and something I'm pretty passionate about.
That's great. So now you've started your own company that you do some consulting. So tell us a little bit about Intrinsic Leader.
Yeah, intrinsic leader, as the name implies, intrinsic means from within, right? And I believe that most of the things that we do motivationally come from within ourselves, either through, we have a belief or we have a goal that we want to meet, and it comes from within, and hence the name intrinsic leader. And what I focus on really is three really key and core things. First one being leadership development. That's what my master's degree is in from Gonzaga here in Washington State. And the second one is around culture. So leaders help to determine the direction for culture, right? It makes sense. And although the culture is made up of everyone that is in the organization. And then lastly, executive leadership. I just was certified by John Mattone, who wrote The Intelligent Leader, which to me is it's the Rolls Royce of coaching. It's really fantastically in depth and really gets underneath what drives leaders to be more effective, especially in the workplace.
And now you're an author. You wrote a book called Mind the Gap. So tell us a little
Yep.
bit about what does the title imply and what is the book about?
Yeah, the title is actually it's a bit whimsical because it comes from in the UK. There's an expression called "mind the gap," and it's the gap between the platform in a train station and getting on the train. And there's signs everywhere that says "mind the gap," and it's just something that's in the phraseology in the UK. And so I chose it because I think today you're seeing this gap widen, which is the gap between organizations that choose to put their people first. In other words, they treat them as people first and employees second, as opposed to the other way around, where most organizations look at their employees as commodities, as disposable commodities. And I think the organizations that shift to more focused on treating them as people first will be the ones that thrive in the new world we find ourselves in, particularly with AI coming to the forefront. So that's really the thrust of the book. And actually, there's a second book Steve, called Closing the Gap that I'm in the final stages of doing. And it's about, well, thanks for telling us about the gap and everything. And in the book, there is a blueprint of how to address it. But Closing the Gap gets much deeper. It gets into the coaching element that I think is critical in order to have this philosophy and then follow it through to make it real.
Having been on the subway in London one time, I do remember with a very beautiful English accent that every time the doors would open, it'd be mind the gap, mind the
Yeah,
gap.
exactly. And that's, the funny thing was, I was in the UK just before I started writing the book, and spent quite a bit of time in London on the underground there, and that mind the gap, and it just I was struggling with a name for the book, and what I realized was, yeah, there's a gap between organizations that look at their employees as people first, the human element, if you will, versus those that don't, and it just like got into my head, and there it is.
It's a great title. It's a great title. So now in the bio, we heard about how, you were working with the Federal Reserve during the financial crisis, and then you're working in healthcare during COVID. So those are two pretty intense times of leadership.
Yeah.
What did you tell us a little bit about those experiences and how that helped you frame kind of this idea that you have going forward with minding the gap?
Yeah, and they're two pretty different scenarios, but what they have in common was organizations under stress that they'd never previously experienced. So if you look at the Federal Reserve Bank, obviously during the financial crisis, um, there were things in there that, there was a political undertow, obviously, as there is with most things nowadays. But there is also this element of being in the spotlight. And unlike a lot of organizations that I've worked with, the Fed doesn't want to be in the spotlight. It's happy to be on page 12 of the Financial Times, not
Yeah.
page one every day. So that scrutiny from not just the media, but from Congress, from the public, I mean, was intense. And the leaders were not used to that kind of scrutiny. And to the point where, in some cases, it paralyzed their ability to make decisions, to kind of push through some of that scrutiny. And it intensified the need for the kind of work that I do. And I consider myself a practitioner in the organizational development slash leadership space. And really, the training that I got for that really came to the forefront in that example. So working alongside leaders, helping them to coach their people to be more proactive, to sometimes, in the Federal Reserve Bank, the decisions, it's not about the quick decisions or the first to market or, things that you equate to a regular for-profit organization. It's about the right decision. So it's committees, it's pondering over the wording of a sentence for days on end and stuff like that. Well, when you're under scrutiny and the spotlight, it's not always the best approach. And so one of the things that came to the forefront for the Fed was the ability to respond to the scrutiny through social media, which was starting to become more prevalent in the workplace. So in other words, Twitter, Facebook. And we actually ended up hiring a guy that worked on President Obama's campaign to come and help us with that. And we were able to kind of craft our responses to some of the scrutiny, which was, to be quite honest, a lot of it was inaccurate. And so it was a platform in which the Fed leaders could respond to in a way that was non-confrontational to them. And so that was great. The other experience, COVID at Swedish, now you're talking life and death. That's a whole different scenario. And people under pressure, losing patience, being psychologically kind of drained and not knowing what to do or where to go. And again, the training that I had came to the forefront with this because able to work one-on-one with leaders and create psychological kind of safety circles where people could come and express their kind of feelings, if you will, in a safe environment without being judged, without feeling like they're being scrutinized or judged for their responses. And so, to me, those two experiences have really shaped leadership at its extremes.
Yeah.
95% of the time, we're working in the guardrails, but occasionally, when you have to step outside, how do you respond? What do you do? And that's instinctual. It's not always something you can train or coach. It happens when it happens, and you respond in the moment.
It's really interesting to me too. Sometimes in a crisis like that, you are forced to make decisions faster than you're comfortable with, but sometimes
Yeah.
it's that creative juices going. I'm a physical therapist, so in our physical therapy profession during, COVID, I mean, before COVID, we heard all the time, we need to figure out telehealth. How can we use telehealth? How can we use it in our profession? How can we do it? And I mean, literally for years it was talked about, but no one could figure out how to do it, or no one had a good plan. And so then all of a sudden COVID hits. Patients can't come to the clinic right now until we figure out what we're going to do. And within 2 weeks, people figured out how to do telehealth physical therapy. I mean, it was just unbelievable. So sometimes during a crisis like that, it forces you to be a little more aggressive and get out of your comfort zone a little bit, and create something that could have been created before, but just kind of pushes you along.
That's an interesting point, Steve, because what I'll tell you is in the midst of COVID, one of the things I was working on was some leadership development workshops. And traditionally, we used to do them, 2 days at a time in person. And when COVID came, the client requested that, obviously we can't do it. Can we do it virtually? And we're like, God, how are we going to do this virtually?
Yeah.
And so we did a lot of tweaking, and what we decided to do was kind of make it more breadcrumb. So less, it's hard to have someone on Zoom all day, or 2 days is almost impossible. But what we figured is maybe what we can do is breadcrumb it a little bit. Watch this PDF, comment, send the comments in the shared platform. Um, Read this PDF, watch this short clip, comment on it, take this self-assessment. And so what we started to do is stretch the learning out. And actually the feedback we got, and we got much better at it. We just threw some mud at the wall, see what stuck, to be perfectly honest. But what we did is we refined it as we went. And what we found was people said they preferred this format because it wasn't as invasive to their work patterns. And what they meant by that was, hey, when I go away to a 2 day workshop, I love it. It's great. The interaction, I learn a ton, blah, blah, blah. But when I get back, I've got 500 emails. I've got to catch up on a few projects. And by the time I've done all that, I've forgotten what it was I learned in the first place.
Yeah.
And what it forced us to do was be very intentional about the subjects and the things that we were going to ask of them. And so what it did, it tightened everything up to the point where a lot of folks said they found it super useful to them. And what we did was we also found that we could act on the feedback almost in the moment. So, for example, one of the things we started to do was reflection sessions. What
Yeah.
in that last month where we learned about conflict management, what tools, techniques that you learned did you use? And people would come to the reflection session. Yeah, I used this technique, it worked great, but I needed to tweak it here and there and everywhere. And so what we started to do was kind of tweak what we were doing so that, the next round of people that came through got a better version of what was previously stated. So
Yeah.
to me, it actually enhanced what we were doing almost unintentionally, because who would have thought you could teach a 2 day workshop in a different format by stretching it out over the course of a month instead of a 2 day squished thing. And the other thing is, I would say, if you look at how we tend to work today, it's all bite-sized pieces. We text instead of calling or having conversations. We read a snippet here, a snippet there. When you watch the news, there's ticker tapes going on with the latest
Mhm.
stock prices. There's another one with sports scores. There's another one with breaking news, and there's 3 or 4 presenters. So you're just getting these bite-sized pieces, and our lives have become so kind of scattered like that this style seemed to suit people much better.
Yeah.
So yeah, I take your point. I think it's very valid.
So let's talk about leadership development programs because I know that's what you do and you've
Yep.
consulted on that a lot. That's what I do. And it seems like a lot of companies are embracing that. So my question is, are we making a difference? Are we training leaders to be better leaders, or is it just a program that looks good and sounds great, but is not that effective? What's your analysis of what we're doing in today's world with leadership development, and how could we do it better?
Yeah, and I think it's a great question, and it's one that this is going to be quite a long answer, but here's
That's
the
okay.
but here's my observations. A lot of companies have leadership development because they feel like they should, because it's what everyone else does, and they pick something and pluck it out of the air and just start training random people, you know. And whilst that it's good in one regard, it's very uninformed in another one. So here's where I land on it. The question is why do you want to train leaders? Why now? And why this particular approach? And when you ask those three questions, a lot of times what I find is they don't really have an answer.
Mhm.
And so to me, where it starts is firstly, what what evidence or data do you have that suggests you need to bolster your leadership development? Because to me, you've got to measure things. Otherwise, there's no telling have we moved the needle or not. And so the question then starts to come down to succession planning, right? So succession planning says, here's Steve in his position today. If Steve left, who would take his place tomorrow?
Mhm.
That's kind of succession 101. It's emergency replacement.
Yeah.
Then underneath that, you would say, well, we got someone here, but they're not going to be ready for probably a year or 2 years with some development. Okay. And then best practices says you want three people in that role. And let's suppose we're talking about a reasonable size organization here, right?
Mhm.
And then underneath that, we want people who are a little bit further out, 3 to 5 candidates, because we know people are going different directions. And so what you're starting to do is build a pipeline of talent. Then the next step is have we had aspirational conversations with these folks to even see if they want to be leaders? Because
Yeah.
some of them may not, right? And then, because why would you put all your eggs in a basket with someone who doesn't want to be a leader? Why would you send them to a leadership development program if they have no interest in being a leader? Doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So, this is an analysis of your talent landscape, if you will. Then after the aspirational conversations are all done, it's then saying, well, where does this person sit now in terms of their leadership potential and their capabilities today versus where do we want them to be? Where do they see themselves as being? And creating a highly kind of interactive, meaning the leader with their subordinate development plan that says, here's where we are today, here's where you want to be, here's the development that we're going to do. And then what talent reviews do is we periodically look at that and said, where is Steve today in his development? I know we started here. Did he do the things that we suggested for development? Did he get that coaching and mentoring? Did he do some on the job experience? Did we give him a stretch assignment? Did he go to this workshop? Blah, 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 blah. So we to measure where Steve is today, and periodically we look at how it's like a staircase. How's Steve going to get to here? And we do that with all of our pipeline. So as you can start to see, Steve, it's quite sophisticated. If you want to get to have your leadership bench be strong, because if you think about it, your leaders are almost the lifeblood of the organization. Because if you think of them as being stewards of the culture, if you think about them steering the direction of the business, if you think of them as being probably highly responsible for your P&L, and so it goes on, right? So I would suggest, in fact, Harvard did this study, and what they did is they presented these 10 items: leadership development, customer service. There was about 10 of these items. And they asked leaders to put in order from 1 to 10, the most important things. And the number one thing on their research revealed as being influential to all the other things was leadership development.
Hmm.
So it affects customer service if you think about it. It affects the bottom line if you think about it. So everything points back to leadership development. So the question then becomes, well, how do we effectively introduce a system, a methodology, a process that takes us there? And I mentioned earlier, I did the John Mattone leadership certification.
Uh-huh.
Absolutely outstanding in its ability for people to look into their core. Because if you think about it, we have an outer core, which, if you think of an iceberg, people see our behaviors, results, things of that nature. What they don't see underneath the iceberg, which represents 90% of who we are, is what are our beliefs? What are our values? How do we come to be what we envision to be? And what Matone's approach is about is reaching into that inner core so that you understand how that behavior affects others.
Hmm.
And what's cool about it is there's a whole bunch of assessments that help you get there, and development that helps that come to life. But also there's a culture assessment that says, as a leadership team, where are we at with this? And when you coalesce all that information together, now you've got a roadmap. Now you've got some data that says where you're at, where you want to be, and all the rest of it. And then, of course, there's the underpinning pieces of development that help get you there. So the reality is, most organizations, they go, we need some leadership development. Who's the best leadership development company out there? Oh, we're going to go for Korn Ferry or whoever it is, right? Without doing any of the analysis. And, there's an old expression in the medical world, which is, prescription without diagnosis is malpractice. And
Yeah.
that's a John Mattone thing that he uses. And I love it because people don't diagnose their leadership development frailties, where they're at, where they want to be, and all the rest of it. They just come straight to the prescription and off we go. And that's why a lot of it fails. It's because they haven't done the other work, the heavy lifting.
Well, how do we identify people to go into the leadership development program, whatever it looks like? Is it self-selection? Do you does everyone start, or do you say, here we have this program, do you want in, or do you rely on middle managers or whatever to say this person should be in and that person should be in? I would assume that as you go through the program, then you start to self eliminate people that maybe aren't in a leadership capacity. But how do you get everybody in and that wants to be in, or find those diamonds in the rough that aren't quite ready yet but are going to develop well?
Yeah, that's a great question, Steve, because here's the sad reality. Of all the companies I've worked for, I can think probably 2 to 3 that actually do this, which is most organizations, they'll say, Steve, you're a fantastic computer programmer. We're going to promote you to a manager. And without any forethought of the fact that it's a completely different skill set.
Yeah.
It's akin to saying, Steve, you're a fantastic bricklayer. We're going to make you a veterinary tomorrow. Right. And it's because it makes no sense. Because you think about it, what takes a great computer programmer, it's very detail oriented. It's very kind of almost introverted in nature, right?
Yeah.
And dealing with people is almost the polar opposite. I worked with some high level PhDs in aerospace at the Fed with world class economists who were absolutely brilliant technically, but horrible people managers because they've been promoted based on their technical ability.
Yeah.
So that's the first kind of thing. To answer your question, and most companies don't even do this as well. They don't have the aspirational conversation that says, do you even want to be a leader? How do you see your next move here? What's that look like for you in the next 2 years, 5 years? And having those conversations, because they don't train their managers to do that either.
Yeah.
And so that's the first thing, is train managers to be much more effective career coaches as part of whatever other training you give them. But the second thing is having the aspirational conversation. And then people start to, let's give them a stretch assignment. Let's give them someone to shadow. Let's give them an assignment where they're a leader for a short span of time. How was that for you? Did you enjoy it? How was the coaching when you were mentored through it? What were some aha moments for you? Where do you feel you need to improve? And so it goes on. And that starts to become the evolution of some hands-on experience, some more formal coaching and mentoring. And again, it's all part of a plan that's laid out that says, here's Steve Anderson. He wants to be a future vice president. Today he's a senior manager. We see Steve being a director first, then a VP. What's it going to take for Steve to get to be a director? Have we had the conversation? What's his development plan look like? What eyes have we got on that development plan? Where's the roadblocks? Are we getting those roadblocks out of the way? What formal learning does he need? What informal learning does he need? So it goes on, right? But
Yeah.
most organizations don't do that, Steve. And
Yeah.
what happens is you end up with horrible managers. And what science tells us is the number one reason someone leaves an organization is because of their manager.
Yeah. 100%. No, it's so true. And you just think of, culture as a bigger topic, so to speak. And if your culture is that as leaders, our number one goal is to find and grow other leaders, then we can start to see down the ladder, so to speak, how we are always looking for those people and how we're always trying to mentor them and coach them and do those things because we're trying to develop other leaders. So I do think that, we need to be on the lookout. I know that the company that I was the CEO of, we had interviews of younger professionals, as you said, to find out what do they want to do, and then you would give them tasks or things to work on over the next year. And right away you could, the easy part would be if somebody comes back and they've done that and more, then okay, they're inspired, they're excited, they want to be there. Somebody else comes back, you interview them the second time and they haven't done anything you told them to do. Well, that's probably not, somebody who's going to rise to that level. So I do think it's getting to know your people at every level and then making sure that you identify people that want to do it and then give them the steps to kind of get there.
Yeah, and the other thing, Steve, is there's tools out there that overcomplicate things, in my opinion. There's a thing called the nine box. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but basically what it does is a grid that says what's this performance of this person, and then what's their potential, and then in the box is one through nine. And it was invented by GE, who incidentally have abolished it because they've realized how clumsy it is.
Yeah.
Because you think about it for a minute, what's the difference between a three and a four or a six and a seven? I mean, it's so close together. Why? Where's the delineation? And it's subjective anyway to begin with. So now what you've done is you've piled subjectivity on top of unnecessary complexity. And what you get is just confusion. And so to me, two by twos are brilliant because here's
Yeah.
someone who's struggling performance wise, coach them up, coach them out. Here's someone who's well placed, don't need to do anything. They have no aspiration. They're doing their job. Fine. Key talent, someone who's got a lot of potentials expressed in their aspirational conversation that they'd like a future, but the timing's not right. Got a life road bump, just got married, just got divorced, going back to school, just had a baby. So it goes on. And then here's your high potential. And these are the guys who are ready to move now. And if we don't give them something, they're probably going to leave the organization. It
Hmm.
doesn't have to get any more complex than that, in my
Yeah.
opinion, my experience. And so what you do is you train managers who have the conversations in each of those four quadrants. Place your folks in there. And sometimes after conversations, you may realize you got someone in the wrong box. That's okay. And nothing's ever fixed. It's more fluid. It's a starting point for you to have conversations. And so I think, that piece is so critical and for people to understand that it's a fluid situation. Someone who's coaching up or coaching out, help them leave gracefully. If that's the decision that you've arrived at and they've arrived at, why belabor it? And if someone really needs some help, then let's coach them up so they get into well placed. Or sometimes they can even get into high potential or key talent. Doesn't matter. The thing about it is that as a manager and a coach, you're doing your job. And the problem is that I've noticed is a lot of organizations just don't train their managers to be that effective. And and they stumble through it. And they look at someone who maybe is high potential and maybe they misplace them as being well placed. They don't pay any attention to them. And then before they know it, that person's left.
Yeah, I think
Talent's
that
walked out the
yeah,
door.
that happens a lot. You
Yeah.
have somebody doing really well in a position, and so it's like, well, we don't want to replace it because they're doing so well. But yet, if that
Mhm.
person has aspirations to be a leader and move up, then you're going to lose them. So I think that happens a lot. Another thing that I think is worth bringing out too is that it's a journey, and where you start and where you end, well, it never ends, but as you grow,
Yeah.
things change. I can remember a lot of times in our leadership development program, we'd be talking to some senior people, and they'd say, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe." What this junior person said, and how can they say that if they're going to be in the leadership position? And I always reminded them, okay, imagine yourself back 20 years ago and some things that you thought or said with your knowledge and beliefs at the time. They change over time. So you can't write them off because of that, because I know when I was just coming up, I thought and said some things that were probably would make me cringe. And now that I'm the CEO, if I knew that I'd said that, but
Yeah.
yet it's a journey. We all grow, so you can't, just expect them to have all those beliefs and strategies and all that you have with 25 years experience versus someone who's just a few years out. So you have to be patient that they grow into that.
Yeah. And I akin it to a garden, Steve, where everyone's at different stages, same as in a garden, but you give them the same nurture in order to help them grow. And some plants will grow quicker, some will like the sun, some like the rain, and so it goes on. And so you've got this, you're treating your whole garden differently, same as you've got some people who learn very quickly and go through the steps very fast. Some people not so much. And everyone has a different work style. Everybody brings something different to the table. And I think our job as people managers is what I think of as unleashing their full potential. And the only way you can do that is get to know them on a personal level and understand what motivates them, what things they don't like to do, where's their abilities truly lie. And a lot of the assessment tools that are out today are very sophisticated and help you to have a conversation. They're not the be all and end all, but they certainly give you some markers, some points of discussion, and some starting points for the conversations.
Yeah.
And I just think that our science now is becoming so important given the advent, say, of AI. And a lot of people feel very threatened by AI, and probably rightly so.
I think the key point that you said and what you just said to me is, but you have to have the conversation. You have to get to know your people.
Yep.
And you can give surveys and do exercises and things like that, but the bottom line is you have to know the people that you are leading. And a lot of people feel like they don't have time to do that. Oh, we're too busy. We got too many things. I don't have time to sit around and chit chat. But on the other hand, it's
Hmm.
really what helps us get to know who we're leading, what they're thinking, what their needs are, and that does take time, but I would argue it's valuable time.
Absolutely.
So talk a little bit about in doing some research for this, you talk about employee first or people first. What is the difference and where are companies missing this sometimes?
Yeah. So when we think about the advent of I think what AI is going to do for organizations is reveal their true culture. And what I mean by that is a people first organization will look at AI and say, I wonder how we can use AI to help our people be more effective. What mundane task can we take off their plate using this new technology? An employee first organization will say, I wonder how many jobs we can replace with AI.
Mm.
Massive difference. And the thing about it is, to me, AI, one thing AI doesn't have is a beating heart. It doesn't have empathy, doesn't have compassion, all the things that we connect as human beings. See, and you take that out of the equation, what have you got left when it comes to culture? Because culture can't see, feel, touch, right? You just know it's there. It's part of the organization. And it's what knits us together. Even when we work remotely, we still have a culture. It's just different. And with AI, by the way, I love AI. I love playing with technology. So to me, it's an enabler. I don't see it as an impediment. And I think a lot of people do. They feel it as a threat to their relevance, to their importance. And I think if you can get beyond that and figure out how do I use this tool to be more effective, it takes you down a much better path. But I think the difference being is organizations that are people first will invest in their people, in their development, and it would be one of the last things that's cut from an organization. When an organization cuts their people programs first, you know they're employee centric.
Yeah.
And there's indicators all over the place. I mean, in our area, we've seen what Microsoft, what Meta, and what Amazon are doing. Is that people first? I don't think it is. And my opinion is that, AI, if you focus on AI at the expense of your people, you will plateau. If you invest with people at the same time as AI, yeah, you may start lower than those that invested wholly in AI. But I think you will elevate beyond them when you do that because you still need people to tell AI what you want it to do. You still need people to do something with whatever AI provides for you, right? So to me, to sacrifice your people development at, at the expense of investing wholly in AI is going to lead to you plateauing and then eventually being left behind. Yeah, it's going to take a bit of time, but it will happen that way, I think.
Yeah, I see that a lot too, where maybe resources get tight or money gets tight, cash is tight, and a lot of people say, okay, we need to cut back on our development program, leadership development program, or we're so busy, we just don't have time to do that anymore.
Mhm.
We got to put it off for a while. And I would agree with you that that's the total wrong mistake, or the wrong move, because it just, to me, that's what's got you there. That's why you're busy. That's why things are, you need to keep it going. You can't put it on hold and be the first thing you cut when things get tough.
It's actually when you need it the most. Because when
Yeah.
I look at my experience at the Fed, a, an organization under intense pressure, they needed our work more than they ever needed it. And there was a wobble where they were considering cutting some stuff. And I had some conversations with some senior leaders. So this is the wrong move. This is when you need to be investing when you're under pressure. And the thing that I think the problem is this. So here's the organization, and here's something that happens that causes them to think, wow, we got to tighten the budget strings here. And what happens is we see our bottom line increase a little bit because we made some cuts. What the smart organization does is, wow, here's something that's going to really affect us. Let's invest in being prepared for that change. And what happens is our bottom line and everything goes down. But when that investment starts to kick in, we rise above where that dip occurred. It's a natural business phenomenon that's been studied for years. And any change, and that's why, if you look at John Cotter's work, who's, I'm sure you know, the grandfather of change management, over 70, close to 80% of change initiatives fail in top organizations. And a lot of it, I believe, is due to this misnomer that we need to cut training, we need to cut employee programs when things go a bit awry. And I think the opposite is true. We need to tell our employees they matter, that we care about you, that you are important to this organization. You are this organization. And what happens is people bond together. and they rise above whatever the challenge is because they feel valued. When you don't feel valued, what happens is, what I've seen is in organizations who start cutting, the culture gets fragmented. People start to self isolate and start looking for other jobs.
Yeah.
And the business world is littered with stories where that's been the case. And I think the organizations that survive are going to be the ones that invest in their people. And look, and what I mean by that is they train their managers to be people centric, not employee centric. Because think about it, when you go to orientation, what's the first thing they do? They sit you down, tell you about the benefits of the organization, and tell you what you can't do. But there's no human element to it. It's very cold in a lot of respects. Now, I'll tell you, I'll contrast that. When I started with HP, which was close to 30 years ago now, 3 weeks of orientation. And in it, they talked about the HP way and they talk about the development that's available to you. And they never cut their development in, and I'm talking like late 90s, early 2000s with, the whole roller coaster of the advent of the World Wide Web and all that kind of stuff. They never cut their employee development programs, not once.
Yeah.
And as a result, people were very loyal to Hewlett Packard.
What I think is really interesting with someone like you, so you've worked with over, not only as an employee, but you've also worked with over 100 different companies in your
Yeah.
uh, consulting business, which gives you a really different view. If I'm a CEO and I got things that are going well and I tell you what I'm doing, well, that's one thing that I see. But with you, seeing all these companies, and maybe we've already said this, or maybe this is redundant, but I'm compelled to ask, when you see those 100 companies that you work with in your experience, what do you think is the one thing that companies miss or are not doing? What's the biggest one? And then what's the one thing a little thing that they could do that would make a huge difference?
Yeah, and I'm not sure it's any one thing, Steve, but what I will say is the companies that invest in their leaders the right way, in other words, the structure we spoke about earlier, succession planning, developing the talent pipeline, who don't just say it, they actually do it with intentionality. It's not just a checkbox activity, it's something they live and breathe every single day. And the ones that have an eye on their culture, and they're really, it's not just a placard on the wall, they actually train their leaders to live it. And when in his book, Good to Great, Jim Collins spoke about this as well, getting the right people with the right skills on the right bus at the right time. It's getting people on the bus was his analogy.
Right.
I think that mentality as well is hiring for culture, not necessarily for skills, because we can develop skills, we can train skills, but culture fit is a much harder thing because the number one reason why someone fails is in an organization is because they can't acclimate to the culture. And so the question then becomes is, well, why is that? Is it because we hired the wrong culture fit? Are we even hiring for culture fit? So I think it's pulling a thread through those things that separates the best from the herd is where they look at people development and talent development in a almost an integrated way. Integrated talent management is a buzzword
Yeah.
that organizations use, but very few actually do it. But you pull that thread all the way through, and it comes from senior leadership. It comes from the CEO through the C-suite, pushed down. And I'll tell you, the companies that I've worked for that have been most successful, they've had one or two people in that C-suite who actually get it and will live it and will try and make sure that everyone else does. Ones that don't attempt to be more laissez-faire about it. Yeah, we should do that. We get to that, blah blah blah. It's just that foo-foo stuff HR does. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that.
Yeah.
Because guess what? Our bottom line's more important. Our sales are more important. Our marketing's more important. Everything's more important. So I think you've got to pull that thread through everything and realize it's just as important as these other elements. Because without people, are you going to sell anything? Are you going to market anything? Are you going to be able to do analysis on how you're doing it and all the other things that we do? If people feel detached, are they going to give you 100%? Are they going to give you kind of supplemental effort? No, but an organization that's people centric, they will. And that's,
One thing,
you know,
yeah, I couldn't agree more. And one thing that I think that is really interesting with AI, and I'm not a doomsayer about AI either. I think there's a lot of benefit from it, but I do know that in the hiring process, so a lot of whether the resumes or inquiries or whatever coming into the organization, the first level of elimination or contact is some AI tool.
yeah,
And I'm sure that you and I can identify times when we've interviewed somebody that did not have the skill, did not meet the criteria, but you just sat there and said, "Oh my God, this is exactly the kind of person we need in our organization." And we
yeah.
teach them those things. So I'm concerned that those kind of people are not getting through that first layer because
Mhm.
AI looks at it from a very obviously analytical perspective and
Yeah,
doesn't see that people thing or the people skills and the compassion and empathy and all those kind of things that we talked about before. So I'm concerned that we're going to miss some of those really key people that we found when we weren't hardly even looking for them.
absolutely, Steve. And I don't think it's a problem that's going to go away anytime soon. And the other side of that story, though, is this. If you think about when we first started in the workplace, which I'm assuming we're roughly the same age, give or take, but you'd see an ad in the newspaper and you'd send your resume and the recruiter maybe had 10, 15 resumes to look at. Nowadays, they have sometimes literally thousands for one job.
Yeah,
You can't read all of them. So guess what? When a machine does it for me and it's just me, we're cutting our recruiting down to the bone. It's just me that's doing it. How are you going to get through 5,000 resumes if you read them all? You're not. But the machine's going to tell me the ones I should be looking at. Give me the top 10, top 20. I'll read them. And then after that, I'll maybe call five or six of them. And from that, I'll select three to interview. And so it goes on, right? So it's a self-imposed problem in one regard because how else is a recruiter going to be effective? Because they've got numbers they need to hit. And so it goes on, right? And I do think that organizations that become more people centric will get underneath that and figure out a solution. I don't have a solution for you, to be honest. I mean, one of the things I know a lot of organizations used to do, and I don't see it so much now, if you refer me to someone and they pan out, we'll give you a bonus. And so, are you going to recommend someone who's not a good fit? Because that's going to come back on you. Probably not. But if you got someone, a friend who's really good and you think would be a culture fit and all the rest of it, maybe you'll take that chance and have a conversation with them. So you're getting people who already work in the organization almost to do the recruiting for you.
yeah,
That I think is quite effective. Um, but aside from that, yeah, it's a self-imposed problem because AI is reading your resume.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so, what's become a lot more powerful, I think, is people are using LinkedIn to make contacts inside the organization they want to target and try to get personal introductions that way, which seems to me the smart way to do it. But not everyone has that kind of savvy or they don't use LinkedIn to its full capacity, just know it's there and they should be on it and their profile's kind of skinny and blah blah blah. Then there's other people who are very sophisticated about it. But it springs to mind something a friend of mine who's marketing told me and says, you can have the best product in the world, but if the marketing is pretty bad, probably not going to sell too many things. You could have the worst product in the world, but fantastic marketing. You're probably going to sell a lot of those things.
Mhm.
And I think the same goes with us as employees slash people. You
Yeah.
could have the greatest resume in the world, but if it's not presented the right way, it's not going to make a difference. And you could have the worst skill set, but you know all the buzzwords and how to work your way around ATS and get yourself that interview.
Yeah.
And who knows, may even land the job.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a problem. And I don't think there's a good solution for it right now.
Getting back to leadership development programs, one of the things you said early on in this interview that I wanted to look at a little deeper is you talked about reflection and
Yeah.
how that when we teach things and we mentor and we coach and we do that, that the reflection piece of that is so important. And I see a lot of programs that don't have that.
Yeah.
You got to give your people time to think about it and talk about it and even be vulnerable. Like, I don't really buy what you just said. What do you mean? I look at it this way and have
Yeah.
the create the space, the safe space where that's okay to do that. And then through that conversation with peers and others, maybe you come around and look at it in a different way. But I think that reflection piece is really big.
Yeah, and Steve, it was one of the surprise things that we introduced into the program because we wanted to feel, what we did is we focused on a topic for a month. And so it starts off with, depending on what it is. So let's take conflict. We start off with a model that helps you figure out your conflict style. And then we build from that. And in about a week into the month, we'll have our first workshop. And it's about 2 to 3 hours. And we pull apart the assessment that you did, Thomas Kilmann model, which is a really good one, by the way. And we start to then talk about conflict, how it feels, the emotional side of it, your role as manager. How do you diffuse? How do you be like a mediator, if that's the case? How do you have conflict with your boss or a subordinate or a peer? Blah, blah, blah. And then we do some exercises around that. We give them some tools. So when we got to the reflection sessions, people started to comment how they really valued them. And it's something that we had not done previously in the in-person workshops. And so what we learned was people were learning from each other. And what it got at, if you think about it, so we had a cohort of about 15 people. And what they were learning from them was part of the culture, which as instructors, we don't really bring to the table because we're not part of the culture. We're outside coming in. So what they learned was, wow, you're a director, I'm a senior manager, and this is how you deal with conflict in the umbrella of the culture we're working in. So that is super relevant to me to listen to. And maybe I'll take the conversation outside of the learn environment here because I want to know more. Maybe you could be my mentor, me, my coach. And we started to encourage that. And part of the program as well is you will become a mentor coach to someone who's coming through this program later because you've stepped through it all. You can help them. And we suggested that be a mandate to the person, our sponsor, for people going through the program, which they did. And so then we created a coaching and mentoring program that was an appendage to this that said, this is how you show up as a coach and as a mentor. And we separated the two things. And then we started to coach them on how to coach people coming underneath them, with the idea being that we create this coaching philosophy that permeated through the organization and was pushed down, kind of thing. But you're right, the reflection sessions are huge. And it's a key leadership skill is being able to look back and say, what did I learn from that? If I had a do-over, what could I do better? What things came up that I wasn't expecting that I can use next time this happens? And so it goes on. And you start to build that into your toolkit. It starts to become massively useful. So yeah, I encourage reflection sessions as being part of a curricula every time.
Yeah, so do I. So we look at Intrinsic Leader again. If I was going to hire you to help me with leadership development programs and some coaching and so on, do I get you? Do you have a large organization? Just tell us a little bit more about Intrinsic Leader. What's it look like, and how would that work if I was a client of yours?
Yeah, great question, Steve. You get me, unfortunately, but basically, I always start with a just a Q&A. What is it you're trying to, how can I help? What are you trying, problem you trying to solve? And we just have a very informal conversation. There's no fee, no contract, no obligation, no nothing. It's just seeing, is there a potential fit? Do I think I can help you? Do you think you can work with me? So it goes on. And then if we get past that, then we start to do a deeper dive into what the problem is. And I'll give you some of my insights into cause. Are we really addressing the right problem? Is there some things further upstream we should think about? And so it goes on. It's the classic kind of consultative slash organizational development approach, if you will. And so, yeah, very small. I have people I work with, if needed, fellow instructors, fellow OD experts, or other areas that I don't consider to be my expertise, but I may have contacts that can help. So yeah, that's how it works. It's very
And
simple.
I'm intrigued. You're someone who's lived all over the world.
Mhm.
Why Seattle? Did you decide to base this, and why are you in Seattle now?
Strangely enough, I was in California, and to me, California had lost its soul a little bit. And so I moved to Oregon where I was working, still living in California. I really liked Oregon. And I traveled quite a bit to Oregon and to Washington State when I worked at the Fed, actually, and even before that. And so I was working in Portland, and then an opportunity came up in Seattle, and it was for Swedish medical group.
Right.
And so decided I'd do that. And I really started to love Seattle because where else can you get mountains, ocean, lakes, ferries, islands, and
Yeah,
another country in a 2 hour drive, and some of the world's best companies all in the same place?
yeah.
I don't think
Well,
there's anywhere else like it, personally.
we do live in a beautiful place. We're blessed, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Duncan, in anticipation of our discussion today, we've covered a lot of ground, but what haven't I asked you that you want to be sure and get in the program today?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. Um, yeah, we did cover a lot of ground, Steve, and it's all the things that I'm passionate about, and also have a lot of experience and time in this space. And there's not really anything I can say specifically. You didn't ask me because we did cover a massive amount of ground. I'll give a plug for my book, Mind the Gap, and also the one that's following it, Closing the Gap. So look out for that. But essentially, aside from that, I really enjoyed the conversation and I
I would
appreciate it very
assume,
much.
thank you. I would assume you can get those on Amazon and other places you buy books.
On Amazon, yeah, Mind the Gap by Duncan Brand. There are other books called Mind the Gap, but none like my one.
Okay, for sure. So at this point in the interview, I always ask my guests the same common question, and that question is, in relation to leadership, what is a pearl of wisdom that you could leave us with today?
Yeah, the thing that I think is most important is understand what your core purpose is when it comes to leading people. And what I mean by that is really deep think about what you want your core purpose to be. And what research tells us is people who have that piece done tend to be more successful than those that don't, who just blunder around getting dressed in the dark. So take the time to craft that statement. And you can Google core purpose statement. How do I develop it? And to me, it's almost like an elevator speech. And, it's something that I think is deeply personal, but it's also something you want other people to be aware of. But once you get that, it's almost like the hub of the wheel. Everything you do should align to that core purpose statement. And once you get that down, things become a lot clearer to you.
Well said. Thanks for sharing that. Well, Duncan, this has been a pleasure. Great to see that you're doing the work. Sounds like you've always wanted to do and were meant to do, and it's so important. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more on everything we talked about, how investing in your people. And that was my line all the time when I was leading a company too. People first. We got to go people first. And I just think with that mindset, you develop cultures where people stick around and they feel engaged and empowered. And then that's what it's all about. So it's good to hear that you're doing those things you love to do. And sounds like you're having good success at it.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it very much. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Well, take care and have a good rest of your day. And maybe we'll run into each other down the road one of these days.
You never know, Steve.
Okay, take care. Bye
Cheers.
bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. To listen to all my interviews, subscribe to Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and many other popular podcast platforms. Some of these interviews are on video, and you can search YouTube for Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson. You can also access the entire library of interviews on my website, orange.coaching.com, and that is orangetheword.coaching.com, and go to the Media Center and click on Podcasts or Video Gallery. You can also enter the website from pilpodcast.com.